Okay, everyone. So we are on to the chapter that is actually the seventh chapter of Flamingo, the interview by Christopher Sylvester. Now, he was a student of history at Peterhouse, Cambridge. He was a reporter for Private Eye for 10 years and has written features for Vanity Fair. Following is an excerpt taken from his introduction to the Penguin Book of Interviews, an anthology from 1859 to the present day. Now, this chapter has been divided into two parts. The first part is an article by Christopher Sylvester, wherein he presents the views about interview, what people think about it, what are the views of the people, how do the general people consider it, and especially what are the views of the celebrities related to interview. And second part is actually an interview, part of an interview taken by one of the correspondents of a famous personality. So let's start with the first part. Part 1. Since its invention a little over 130 years ago, the interview has become a commonplace of journalism. So it has become a very frequent thing, or very, what you can say, common thing of journalism. Today, almost everybody who is literate will have read an interview at some point in their lives. While from the other point of view, several thousand celebrities have been interviewed over the years, some of them repeatedly. So, since the time, that is almost 130-40 years back, the interview has become very, very common. And he says that anyone who is interested in reading must have at least read some interview till now. And so we can say that thousands of celebrities have been interviewed, and some of them have been interviewed repeatedly. So it is hardly surprising that opinions of the interview, of its functions, methods, and merits vary considerably. So as it is so widespread, so there's nothing surprising related to the opinion of its function, methods, and merits. They vary. Different people have different idea about what interview is. Some might make quite extravagant claims for it as being, in its highest form, a source of truth, and in its practice an art. Many extravagant words, extravagant claims means they praise it this by saying that in its highest form it is an ultimate source of truth, and in its practice an art. So interviewing or taking interview is an art. While on the other hand, others, usually celebrities, who see themselves as its victims, might despise the interview as an unwarranted intrusion into their lives. Whereas, whose interviews are taken? The people who are famous. And they feel that these interviews are unwarranted intrusion, unnecessary interference into their lives, or feel that it somehow diminishes them, it somehow pulls them down. Just as in some primitive cultures it is believed that if one takes a photographic portrait of somebody, then one is stealing that person's soul. As it is believed in some of the primitive cultures, it is not allowed to take a photograph, because it is a general belief that if a photograph is taken, photographic portrait of somebody is taken, it is just like stealing that person's soul. Similarly, these celebrities, they feel that the interviews take away some part of their lives. V.S. Naipaul, Vidyasekhar Naipaul, the Nobel Prize winner, feels that some people are wounded by interviews and lose a part of themselves. According to V.S. Naipaul, some people feel hurt and they feel that some part of them has been taken away from them. Lewis Carroll, the creator of Alice in Wonderland, a very famous story, was said to have had a just horror of the interviewer. He kept away from the interviewer. He was considered to be full of horror. And he never consented to be interviewed. He never gave permission to be interviewed. It was his horror of being lionized. He felt that people will make big out of the things what he would say, or make him something what he is not, made him thus repel would-be acquaintances, interviewers, and the persistent petitioner for his autograph. He would always run away, repel anyone who would try to come and make some acquaintances with him, or the interviewers, or the people who wanted his autograph. He would just keep away, try to shy them off. He was shy of all of them. And then later on he would relate the stories of his success in silencing all such people with much satisfaction and amusement. And then in his own group he would narrate these stories, that how he was successful in repelling such type of people. Rudyard Kipling, I think all of you are aware of this name, Rudyard Kipling, the Jungle Boy, the author of the Jungle Boy, expressed an even more condemnatory attitude towards the interviewer. Condemnatory. He condemned the interviewers. His wife, Caroline, writes in her diary for 14th October 1892 that their day was wrecked by two reporters from Boston. From the excerpts from the diary of Rudyard Kipling's wife, Caroline, there is a mention of one particular day, 14th October 1892, and she has mentioned that their day was spoiled because of the two reporters from Boston. She reports her husband as saying to the reporters, "Why do I refuse to be interviewed? Because it is immoral. It is a crime, just as much of a crime as an offense against my person, as an assault, and just as much merits punishment." So she records that interaction which took place, and she quotes her husband, Rudyard Kipling, talking to the reporters, who told them that why he refused to be interviewed, because now he says that it is immoral. He considered interview as a crime, personal offense, considered to be as an assault, an attack, and he feels that it merits punishment. It is cowardly and vile. No respectable man would ask it, much less give it. So it was the view of Rudyard Kipling, that no respectable man would ask for interview, and no respectable man would ever give it. Yet Kipling had himself perpetrated such an assault on Mark Twain only a few years before. Now look at this hypocrisy of the celebrities. When they are interviewed, when people come to take their interview, they condemn it, but they themselves are not hesitant in taking interviews. Kipling condemned interview, calling it as immoral, crime, assault, cowardly and vile. He even goes to the extent of saying that no respectable man would ask it, much less give it. But yet, he himself took an interview of Mark Twain only a few years before. Mark Twain. I hope you are aware of this name, Mark Twain. Samuel Langerhans Clemens was his real name, and it was his pen name. Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, these are the famous works of Mark Twain. And Kipling had taken interview of Mark Twain. Now what does it show? It shows the hypocrisy of the celebrity. H.G. Wells, another famous writer, considered to be the father of the modern science fiction in English. His famous book, The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, in an interview in 1894, referred to the interviewing ordeal. Ordeal is bad experience. He called interviews as a bad experience, but was himself a fairly frequent interviewee, and 40 years later found himself interviewing Joseph Stalin. He considered interview to be an ordeal, but he was himself a very frequent interviewee, taking interviews of others. And when he made this statement 40 years later, he was himself interviewing Joseph Stalin. Now, who was Joseph Stalin? Joseph Stalin was the second after Lenin. He took over the charge of USSR, and it was during his regime, the famous Iron Curtain policy, that came into existence. Saul Bellow, who has consented to be interviewed on several occasions, nevertheless once described interviews as being like thumbprints on his windpipe. Saul Bellow was not so much critical about interviews. He had consented for many interviews, but he also did not feel comfortable. He described interviews as being like thumbprints on his windpipe, as if he was choked. Now, these are the views of the celebrities. Now, author comes to the conclusion that yet, despite the drawbacks of the interview, maybe interview has its own drawback, but it is a supremely serviceable medium of communication. These days, more than at any other time, our most vivid impressions of our contemporaries are through interviews. Dennis Bryan has written. According to Dennis Bryan, interviews are our most clear impression about our contemporaries. Almost everything of a moment reaches us through one man asking questions of another. One man is asking question and one is replying, and through that we come to know about the individual who is being interviewed. But because of this, the interviewer holds a position of unprecedented power and influence. Now, the person who is taking interview is himself in a position which author says is of unprecedented power and influence. And maybe this is the reason why the celebrities, they dislike interview, because the person who is taking interview seems to be more powerful. Everything is in the control of the interviewer, not the interviewee. And maybe this is the reason why these celebrities despise interview. So here was the first part of the chapter, in which the author has presented certain aspect of interviews, talking about its merits and demerits and how people think about it, what are the views of the people, especially the celebrities, and what is the position of an interviewer.